Hello and welcome to the Federal. You're watching a special series of interviews entitled RSS at 100. We are presenting this special series to mark the centenary year of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is the ideological fountainhead of about 40 odd organizations, of which the Bharatiya Janata Party is the political affiliate. The RSS was established in 1925. This is a very important milestone, not just for the organization, but also for the organization as well as for the other, uh, those who are part of these, what we call as the Sangh Parivar. I am going to be talking to a very eminent historian of the country, Professor Salil Misra, who has held numerous positions at various universities and is currently, also engaged in the field of teaching history. Salil Misra, welcome to this program. Through this series of interviews with various eminent guests, we will try to unravel various segments of the history of the RSS and various facets also we will try to understand. We will begin with you. The RSS was formed in 1925, but it is not as if the ideology of Hindu nationalism, or as Hindu majoritarianism, as many of us would like to call it. It is not that they initiated this ideology. There was some kind of similar thinking prior to that. So that is what we are actually going to be focusing with you. Now, RSS was formed in the city of Nagpur in 1925, and it was preceded by a couple of riots which happened in Nagpur in 1924, and it continued. There were various issues involved, including that the Ganpati procession, the immersion ceremony of the annual Ganpati festival, was delayed for a year because of a disagreement with the administration over the route of the procession. If we actually look at that period, it somehow cannot avoid the fact that from sometime in the late 19th century, from that time onwards, the last few decades, we saw that there was a central role of music and musical processions which were recurring in communal riots and conflicts between Hindus and Muslims. Playing music in front of mosque became a kind of a template of what provoked these riots. So not just the incident in Nagpur, but all that was happening in India, in British India, in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, I would like to understand from you. Yes, Professor Mishra.
Thanks, Nilanjan, and thank you. I think it's a very important initiative that you have taken. By way of an answer to your question, I would like to make 2 points. First, of course, the 19th century. It's an extremely important century, and I would understand it as one in which India's community profile was completely transformed from the beginning of the century till the end of the century. The communities in general and religious communities in particular used to be local, ritualistic, etc. And then there is a huge transformation in the community profile. And by the end of the 19th century, we begin to see pan-Indian religious communities of Hindus and Muslims. In other words, a large number of Hindus and Muslims begin to look upon themselves as members of these pan-Indian, Muslim community and Hindu community. So there is this huge transformation that happens in the 19th century, which helps us to understand some of what happened subsequently in the 20th century. I will not go into reasons for this transformation of community profile, but that we can do. But we must recognize that at the level of identity formation, 19th century is a century of a quest for identity. People are searching for identities. along the axis of religion, nationality. There is also a national community which is gradually forming. So it's a very interesting century. Nonetheless, on the religious scale, because that's what we are interested in, there is this great transformation in the community profile, and we have this pan-Indian beginning of these pan-Indian communities of Hindus and Muslims. Census plays a very important role in this process.
Okay.
The second thing that I would like to highlight is the very nature of Hinduism. Hinduism, traditional Hinduism, was more of a non-congregational religion. It had some of its unique features. Uh,
Right.
of course, it was internally plural. There is lack of a doctrinal centralization. I mean, there is no single book or single doctrine. The great deal of
That's
diversity,
right.
doctrinal and otherwise. Now, from the beginning of the from the mid 19th century onwards, important changes start taking place in this. It's almost as if Hinduism is trying to imitate both Islam and Christianity in some ways. So
Okay.
stigmatization and imitation happen at the same time. Christians are the other, Muslims are the other. In order to confront them, you have to, probably become a bit like them. So the
Okay.
idea is also to make Hinduism into a kind of a congregational religion. These public displays, public rituals, congregations become much more important than they were in the early part of the 19th century or even in traditional Hinduism. Therefore,
When
the music.
I'll just interrupt. When we talk about
Yeah,
being more congregational, you know, two very solid, instances come into my mind. The emergence of what is called as the Ganpati Puja in Maharashtra. It starts becoming more congregational. You start having coming out, and the Durga Puja in Bengal. Where it comes out from the private domain to the public domain. Is this what you are talking about?
very much. This is an impossible. This is an example of the principle that I was enunciating. I mean,
Okay.
these two examples, Ganpati festival and Durga Puja, they actually substantiate the principle that Hinduism has also begun to incorporate elements of congregation, etc. It is also beginning to turn into a congregational religion, much like Islam is and much like Christianity was. Friday, Sunday mass in Christianity, Friday prayer in Islam. Hinduism has not had nothing equivalent of that, and suddenly there is this notion that it should have some of those features. So some of these public rituals, public features, they begin to enter into it, not entirely consciously or deliberately, but not entirely unconsciously either. So at a semi-conscious level, there is a great effort to change and transform Hinduism. Arya Samaj, of course, plays a very, very important role in this. And that's a story which we'll probably come to at some point.
So this sense of, the identity as Hindu, is this what actually prompted some people in some sections of Hindus in Nagpur to take out a procession, and in the course of the procession to stop the procession outside areas where there were mosques and then play music very loudly. Now, as we know that believers of Islam thought that music was something which was proscribed in Islam. It was not supposed to be religiously practiced. So it was felt that it was an assault on Islam, on the people who followed Islam, and that is what actually led to these conflicts. Is this what we can understand?
Nilanjan, it's a game of mutual provocations.
Right.
We know that music is not all that forbidden in Islam, particularly in South Asian Islam.
That's
Music
right.
is a very, very important part. Qawwalis, etc. It's a very
But that
important
is
part
not
of.
conservative Islam. That is what you call the part of the Sufi tradition.
Very much, very much. But Sufi Islam was very dominant in South Asia, in India particularly. More
At that
important, more dominant than the high classical Arabic Islam in Bengal and other places. Uh, uh, So there is this game of mutual provocation. They're trying to provoke each other. Why are they trying to provoke each other? I think let's now shift away from Hindus and Muslims and turn to the other side. The census operations, the British.
Right.
The census operations from the 1870s onwards, they create this huge consciousness of, firstly, how many Hindus and how many Muslims are there, majority, minority, where there are more Hindus and less Muslims, more Muslims and less Hindus. Are the number of Hindus declining? If it's declining, why is it declining? Are Hindus being converted to Christians, as for instance in Punjab, or Islam? And that is seen at a great loss. So suddenly these religious faiths, which coexisted with each other, minor strife here and there, but at a mega level, they become competitors and rivals. And therefore begins this game of mutual provocation. And I think much of the violence, riots, the issues around which riots happen, they are part of this game of mutually provoking each other. Now, who starts what is relatively less important, but from the end of the 19th century, this public display of mutually provoking symbols and activities, it starts in a very, very big way and plays an important role in communal violence. So census has to be brought in as something, as an institution, which creates a very new kind of consciousness, anxiety, sense of loss, etc., etc.
Okay, so it is in this backdrop that you have a group of Hindus in Nagpur who think that it is time that Hindus must organize themselves as Hindus. Now, mind you, I would like to remind our viewers that late 19th century is also the time when we are seeing the emergence of the Indian national identity, the national movement. You have the Congress being established in 1885, which gives rise to some kind of an sentiment of Indian nationalism. Within this identity of Indian nationalism, you have the identity as Hindu and Muslims, as you explained it. And in Nagpur, some people feel that we must actually, form an organization to organize the Hindus. What they do is, of course, going to be discussed, in the later part of our series. But what we need to understand is the backdrop which is provided to these processions, to these riots, and the establishment of the RSS. Two very important things. One is, of course, the publication of V.D. Savarkar's, booklet, or a very slim volume of books, which is essentials of Hindutva. That is what is published in the 1920, 23, 24. That is the time when it starts circulating in a pseudonym initially. And the other thing is the violence in the Mopla region of Kerala. A team of, fact-finding team is also sent by various people from Nagpur. B.S. Munjay, KB Hedgewar, they were all part of that process of investigations. Can you tell us as to how this particular booklet and or a monograph, whatever we would like to call it, and the Mopla violence, led to the formation of the RSS?
Yeah, and Nilanjan, three things, but very, very briefly. I wouldn't take much
Yes.
time. First, as you said, that in the 19th century, we have these parallel processes or parallel trajectories. On the
Right.
one hand, there is a process or project of religious communities being transformed into pan-Indian religious communities, which I talked about. Parallelly, there is also a process of making a transformation of Indian people into a national community. In other words, Indian nationalism, emergence of Indian nationalism, the formation of Congress really symbolizes it. So Indian people are also being organized into a nation, a national community, cutting across differences of religion and region and culture and language and so on. That's a very, very important process. These two processes are running parallelly. We must understand their relationship. Sometimes they come closer, sometimes they grow distant, but they never quite merge into each other. So that
Right.
is by way of a backdrop that is important. The second thing is why Maharashtra Nagpur Ganpati festival. If we have to understand Hindu communalism and its emergence, I think four regions are very important. Punjab and Bengal, for the simple reason that in Punjab, Hindus were a minority of about 30%. Bengal, they were dominant culturally, but a minority of about 44%, so very significant minority. UP, because they, although Muslims were a minority, but Muslims were almost an economically privileged minority,
Dominant.
elite,
Yeah.
landlords and zamindars and talukdars and prominent people, also people of government patronage. Fourth region is Maharashtra. Now, I do not know why Maharashtra is so important, but I think it's important. Either it's because of the historical memory, some kind of a historical memory which was being inculcated of having taken on the Mughals or the Mughal Maratha confrontations, or maybe other reasons. But from Maharashtra, there is this development of a very interesting idea of Hindu nationalism. Tilak symbolizes it. Later, also, people from other regions, Lajpat Rai, Madan Mohan Malviya from UP, and other.
Exactly.
Now, Hindu nationalism is a very interesting category. They are very anti imperialist. They are nationalist in the sense that they are both anti British, anti imperialist, and they want the unity of Indian people. But there is a Hindu dimension to it. Hindu dimension shows up in situations of Hindu Muslim violence, on the question of rituals, on the question of language, sometimes Hindi Urdu, and sometimes in those regions where Hindus are a minority, as they were in Bengal and Punjab, it also takes on the form of a minority politics. It carries the fears and insecurities which are characterized with a minority status. So there is this important development of the a concept of this concept of Hindu nationalism, not just a concept, but there were people who actually practiced and believed in this kind of politics. Thirdly, uh, on Savarkar's book, it's a very Hindutva, it's a very important book, and sometimes we don't realize its significance. But let's go back to the late 19th century, and then we realize why this book was written and why this was important. You know, Unlike today, then it was not very clear as to who really is a Hindu. For some
Hmm.
reason, there was some clarity about who is a Muslim and who is a Christian. There is a kind of a doctrinal element.
Right.
But who is a Hindu was not all that clear for some reasons. For instance, what do the tribals of central India and tribal communities, they may follow some rituals of Hinduism, but not all rituals of Hinduism.
Right.
Are they Hindu or are they not? Given the doctrinal element within
There was also
Hinduism,
animals. You know,
yes,
they would worship trees and various animals. Those traditions were there.
absolutely. Then there are groups within formal Hinduism, but doctrinally they may not be recognized. What is called today Dalit and what were then called untouchables. Now, are they broadly within Hinduism or are they not? Thirdly, given that castes were supposed to be formed on occupational basis, cobbler,
Hmm.
someone is a cobbler and something else. Now, what do you do if you find that occupation being practiced by a non-Hindu? What do you do with the Muslim cobbler? Because he's a cobbler, he should be a part of a Hindu framework, but he's not a Hindu. So there was
Oh.
not so much of clarity on who really a Hindu is, which is why this book. And the important contribution that the book makes is that it gives us a definition which is based on certain inclusions and certain exclusions. It's both very inclusive and it's very exclusive. If you say that all those for whom India is their sacred Punya Bhumi and Pitra Bhumi, sacred
Hmm.
land, what are you saying? This definition is very inclusive. It includes Buddhists, it includes Jains, it also includes Sikhs.
Six. Yes.
But it's very exclusive. It clearly excludes the Muslims and the Christians. They may have been converts, their rituals may be very Indic and Indian, but they are excluded. So it's a very innovative definition, which is both inclusive and exclusive at the same time. And we can understand this effort at trying to define Hinduism because of the kind of 19th century background, particularly after census, when it was not absolutely clear who is a Hindu. Therefore, the need to define who a Hindu is.
I also want to understand from you in the 1890s, we are also seeing, in Maharashtra, you have the Ganesh festival becoming a public spectacle. I'm saying a public spectacle, not quite the way it is happening now. It goes on for several days. Immersion processions are taken out over a fortnight long period. But at that time, along with you know the community celebration of the Ganesh festival, you also have the emergence and the deification of Shivaji, who is definitely a historical character, not part of the Hindu pantheon. How does these two merge, and how does the two impact the development of politics and the various ideologies at that particular time?
Nilanjan, in order to understand Hinduism well and properly and in a satisfactory manner, we need to do away with two categories. One,
Right.
of course, is this category of eternal Hinduism,
Okay.
ancient ancient faith which was constructed some 5,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago and since then has remained unchanged. This idea of eternal India does
Okay.
not really work. And the other category we need to abandon and throw out of the window is invented Hinduism. It's not eternal, but it's not also not entirely invented. It was not invented
Okay.
in the 19th century, as was argued by some of the colonial scholars and historians. It is a vibrant, growing, evolving tradition. And it has
Okay.
evolved, and there are multiple stages, the Vedic stage and the Buddhist stage and the Puranic stage. Let me not go into all that, but there are multiple stages. Now, it is here that Shivaji really as a symbol becomes important. This battle of Shivaji or the conflict between Shivaji and Aurangzeb really has many dimensions, multiple dimensions. Of a regional power trying to assert itself. But I think religion, when this medieval conflict between Shivaji and Aurangzeb, when it was memorialized, when it was narrated, when it was remembered in the 19th century, I think
Mhm.
religious digit was one very important digit through which it was memorialized and it was remembered and
Okay.
became a part of people's memory. So, in the 19th century, when all those public rituals are happening as a part of what I said, turning Hinduism into a congregational
Congregational
religion,
religion.
uh, then I think, and because it was happening in Maharashtra, then I think the historical memory of Shivaji versus Aurangzeb that comes in very, very handy because that ties up with this with the
Shivaji becomes
conflict.
important, and he comes into the public space not as a regional power who challenged the imperial Delhi, but as a Hindu king who challenged the Muslim emperor of Hindustan, that is Aurangzeb. Is that how it
Very,
is?
very, very much, very, very much. Also, because medieval period is a very important period, many changes are taking place within Hinduism, which is why this eternal theory does not work. But it's not also something Hinduism, the essentials and the basic elements of Hinduism cannot be understood and explained if we focus only on the 19th century. Not all of it is completely invented. Very, very important developments did take place during the medieval period, which subsequently became a part of this collective memory of the people. And in Maharashtra initially, and then also rest of the country, Shivaji became a very, very important symbol of this collective memory of Hinduism.
Okay. Uh, there is also one aspect. We talk about the RSS being established in 1925, but before that, you have the Hindu Mahasabha, which exists as an organization, as a political front, political party, whatever you would like to call it. I do not know if today's categories can be fitted on the Hindu Mahasabha of the first two or the first three decades of the 20th century. But how, what was the RSS? What was this objective, and how was it different to what eventually became the RSS?
How was your question? Is how
My
was
question
Hindu
is, what were the objectives? Let's first try to understand why was the Hindu Mahasabha established. First, it started in Punjab and a couple of other provinces, maybe UP also, and then it became nationally in the 1915, 16. That is when it becomes an starts having annual conferences. That is where it actually exists more as an annual conference, like the Congress used to be initially, than as an
That's
organization. But we need to understand why was the need felt for something called the Hindu Mahasabha.
That is right. An All India Hindu Mahasabha was formed in 1915. But before that, as you said, regional formations, Hindu Sabhas already existed in UP and in Punjab. There were local or regional reasons.
Right.
In Punjab, the main reason, of course, was that the British had passed this Land Alienation Act, according to which the land could not be sold off to non-agriculturist communities, the traders. The traders could not buy the land of the agriculturists. The idea was to reserve land for the agriculturist caste.
Agriculture.
Now, when traders wanted to oppose it, it was opposed not on the grounds of traders versus agriculturists. It was opposed on the grounds of Hindu versus Muslims. Much of that land was in the hands of the Muslims, large landlords in Punjab. Hindus were the new traders, the Khatris and the others, Arodas and the Khatris who had
They
moved
were
to the
the
cities.
emerging economic elite, is that right?
Emerging group trade from of the traders and who had moved into the cities, and they thought that their interests can be best served by making it a Hindu versus a Muslim issue. And from the other side also, it was made into a Muslim versus Hindu issue. And so a Hindu Sabha was formed, because their great belief was that Congress was not really taking up their cause. So they formed a separate Hindu Sabha. In UP, I think there was this Hindi Urdu contest conflict. Both languages were competing for official patronage. This patronage went to went to Urdu, sorry, and there was this big Hindi movement against it. And I think that somehow at some point Hindi Urdu got conflated with Muslims and
Communalization
Hindus.
of language happens at that time.
Communalization of the linguistic rivalries happened, and I think a Hindu Sabha was formed there. So there were regional reasons, but eventually it was felt a Muslim League had been formed, All India Muslim League in 1906, that there should be an All India organization of the Hindus. Congress, it was known, Congress programmatically and other ways was a national organization, and which would not take up religious issues, and therefore this Hindu Mahasabha was formed. What exactly was the relationship of Hindu Mahasabha with RSS? I do not really know. Initially it was believed that this is political versus cultural, in the sense that Hindu Mahasabha was distinctly a political organization. It would take up demands pertaining to politics. Uh,
Right.
should should Sindh be separated from Bombay or not? What should be the proportion of Hindus in the legislative assemblies? Should there be weightage for Muslims in Punjab, in other provinces, etc., etc.? RSS was more keen probably on cultural issues. That's a theme on which I do not know very much. But what is clear is that Arya Samaj was a kind of an inspiring institution. So this Arya Samaj background is something which brings both Hindu Mahasabha and Arya Samaj and RSS together, but in their functional capacities, I
They
do
have
not really
they saw themselves as having different roles.
very,
That is
very,
why
very much,
that is
very,
why
very.
people continue to be part of the Hindu Mahasabha and RSS separately, even though they kind of assisted each other till a particular time. But
Very much.
let's try to understand that you have the Hindu Mahasabha which comes up, but there are several very eminent people who continue to be very active in the Congress also while being part of the Hindu Mahasabha. You referred to Madan Mohan Malviya at some point. He was among the stalwarts of the Hindu Mahasabha and also of the Congress. How does one understand this or explain this?
Nilanjan, there was a time when it was not believed that these distinctions really need to be maintained. A
It
large number of
seems so difficult to believe in today's India.
That's right. A large number of Muslim leaguers were members of the Congress. Hafiz
That's right.
Ibrahim, Khalifuzzama, and uh, Maulana Azad and Nehru, Madan Mohan Malviya, he went and attended sessions of the Muslim League. This was a time when there is this liberal dimension to politics, in which, as a kind of gentlemanly agreement or whatever, the hard boundary lines had not really been constructed. So people like Lajpat Rai, people like Madan Mohan Malviya and others, they did not really see any great contradiction between being very active in the Hindu Mahasabha, but also being very active in the Congress. Just like Khalikuzzama, Hafiz Ibrahim, the Bombay leader, MC Chagla, they did not see any kind of contradiction between being good Muslim leaguers and
Congress.
being congressmen. In any case, both within Hindu Mahasabha and Muslim League, there was a very anti-imperialist chunk. The organization as a whole was not anti-imperialist, neither Muslim League nor Hindu Mahasabha. That they were not. But
Yeah.
within these organizations, there was a chunk which was very anti-imperialist. And this anti-imperialist chunk always retained a link and connection with the Congress. They did not give up their organization, but they would be in and out, and not in and out. They would be both at the same time. Congress constitution had a clause in 1920 that its elected members will not be members of communal organizations, but they could not define what a communal
What are the
organization was. There was a
organizations?
large number of cultural and religious organizations. It was only in 1938 that this all India Muslim League and All India Hindu Mahasabha were defined as communal organizations, and then the elected members of the Congress it was forbidden for them. They could not then be members of both. So Madan Mohan Malviya shifted to Congress. He was no longer with the Hindu Mahasabha. Some went over to the other organization and so on. But there was this ambiguity, fluidity, but a kind of an overlap element among the anti-imperialist elements. So many Hindu Mahasabhites were congressmen, many Muslim leaguers were also congressmen in the 20s.
Right. You talked about, the emergence of the Hindu Mahasabha as an all India body in the 1915, and that is the time when it happening. And the Hindu Mahasabha is gathering some kind of a strength. It is becoming, beginning to articulate the views of a political Hindu. That is what is happening. It's also the time when we see the advent of Gandhi. He returns to India from South Africa and starts getting involved in building the first real mass movement in India. It starts with the Champaran, his time in Champaran with the Indigo movement there. And then thereafter, after Jallianwala Bagh and various other events, we see the non-cooperation movement. Along with it, the bringing together the Khilafat movement, which there was massive protest from large sections of Hindus, including those who in Nagpur, Hedgewar, was an important member of the Congress, uh, especially within Nagpur, starts having a disagreement, and the final break happens with the Congress and the formation of the RSS. To what extent do you think that the Khilafat movement was important in bringing about this development and being seen as, as Congress being as responsible for communalizing the whole national politics and giving preference to Muslim nationalism.
It's a very complex question. Khilafat movement did communalize our politics. There is absolutely no doubt about it. So politics, or let's say communal politics, or the flavor of communal politics, is from pre-Khilafat days is very, very different from post-Khilafat days. So Khilafat is a very, very important factor to be kept in mind. But how do we understand Khilafat? You see, one
And
thing that happens.
why did Gandhi, advocate the Khilafat movement?
Very much, very much. One thing that happens is a development of a pan-Islamism as both an ideology and also as a kind of a force in many countries, but in India particularly. In the initial period, this pan-Islamism, or those who believed in pan-Islamism, they were politically either neutral, or in India, they went along with the colonial rule and they were not opponents of the colonial for various reasons. However, in the initial decades of the 20th century, uh, international situation changes and there is an interesting coming together, interesting alliance of pan-Islamism with anti-imperialism. Pan-Islamic, those who believe in pan-Islamism in India, they are also now very, very anti-imperialist. Hasrat Mohani and a large
Yes.
number of people, Muhammad Ali, etc. Now, objectively, there is this alliance. And when the World War happens, then they form a Khilafat committee. And
Right.
Khilafat committee becomes very, very active. Khilafat, even if the alliance had not happened on their own, they would have been fighting the British. then I think
Right.
it's Gandhi's idea. They reach out to Gandhi, and it's a great opportunity for an alliance. I mean, why would you not have an alliance? There is a non Jallianwala has happened. There is a non-cooperation movement, and then there are some people who are also
Raising
very, very
voice against the British.
in a very committed manner want to take on the British imperialism within the same country. It's a great opportunity of coming together, and I think it's Gandhi's genius that he facilitates this alliance, and that gives great strength to both the Khilafat movement and the non-cooperation movement. Shraddhanand enters Jama Masjid and gives a speech to Muslims, and Muslims follow him. Muslims listen to him. These things we cannot imagine today, but that was the
Yes.
climate. Instances of music before mosque come down, instances of cow slaughter comes down, etc. So during that period, for as long as it lasted, it seemed to be capable of providing a solution to the communal
So,
problem,
so
but
as
it
long
ended.
as it lasted,
Yeah.
Gandhi bringing in Khilafat movement into the early Indian national movement, was a very successful strategy.
So I'm still very split. I still cannot categorically say that it was, it should not have been done, or it was a great blunder or
Right.
whatever. I mean, look at the context. It was a great opportunity. It worked very well. It ended very tragically. That also we have to
That's,
realize.
that's something which
Khil-
we have to understand.
Khilafat leaders were very disappointed because Gandhi withdrew the non-cooperation movement.
It happened, but
Khilafat
for
movement
completely
lost.
different reasons. Chauri Chora was a completely different
Absolutely.
reason.
Khilafat went on till 24, but then in Ottoman Empire collapsed and Mustafa Kamal Pasha took over, etc. And now looking back, one can say that it was a complete disaster, but it did communalize our Indian politics, or our politics, in a very,
It,
very big way.
it did communalize and actually led the formation, led the basis for what,
Very much,
eventually the establishment of the RSS along with the
very much,
riots in Nagpur, which we have talked about.
very,
Uh,
very much.
So thank you, Salil. We have in today's program, in our conversation, we have talked about what I call is the period of prehistory of the RSS. This is the basis which is happening not just in the city of Nagpur where it is established, but from there it goes out into becoming a pan organization. Much later, it takes decades for the RSS to become. We'll talk about it as we go in, into the various other programs in this series that we talked about. But yes, thank you very much for talking about this period from the late 19th century and the early 20th century when multiple identities come, the identities most importantly of people as Hindus, people as Muslims, and people as Indian nationalists, as Indians. That is also happening as you talked about simultaneously. Thank you very much, and I hope that the viewers have been able to get a fair understanding the basis on which the RSS was.